The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back, in case you're wondering, with George Case. George is here, and so are we. How are you, George?
Hey, just fine. Good morning, everybody.
Good. Introduce us all, if you would.
Okay. Well, on the podcast, and I think we're going to be talking a little bit about some more about Washington baseball history. But David Hubler's on. David and his book Nats and the Grays, and Ronnie Rabinovitz and Chad Rubin from Minnesota talking about the Twins and the baseball history in that area. And so we should have a lot to discuss, and I'm looking forward to it. And of course, Ralph is bringing us all together, so this is going to be a fun day.
Good. I can't wait. George, you went to a big event yesterday. It wasn't your event, but you were a major part of it. Tell us about it.
Okay, well, thank you. The last 6 years, there's been a group meeting in Bethesda, Maryland, by Mark Hornbaker, and Mark was a guest of ours on the podcast a few months ago, and Mark had really started this, and David came, I think it was, 2 years ago, David?
Yes, 2 years ago. My Saturday's been kind of screwed up since then, but yeah, I missed it. I really had called Mark about what was available, and then I couldn't sign on.
Right. Well, the thing about this group, it's very active. This year, it actually sold out. There were over 100 attendees, and they handle it at the Bethesda Hilton Garden Inn in Bethesda, and they're probably going to have to look for a new venue because they're just outgrowing it. And it really began many, many years ago just as a small little group of a few Washington baseball people, and it was called the Washington, D.C. Baseball Historical Society. And there was a little, about a quarterly newsletter called Nats News. A gentleman named Tom Holster started it. He was followed by Jim Hartley, and Nats News is still published. And, every quarter, 3 months, there's a publication that comes out with many interviews with players or player features, bios, and that kind of thing. And, of course, now there's a tremendous interest, again, in Washington baseball because the Nationals are the new team in town. And Washington had been without baseball for 34 years. So they asked me, the first meeting was 6 years ago when Mark Hornbaker called me and said, George, you've got a lot of knowledge about Washington baseball history. Would you be willing to speak? And I said, certainly, I'd be happy to. So it's grown from there. I think we had like 25 or 30 in the first meeting that was in a little bar in Bethesda, and everybody was crammed into this little space. And now we're at this Hilton Garden Inn, and we're starting to outgrow that. So it's very interesting to see it. Mark Hornbaker has done a wonderful job, and David was nice enough 2 years ago to come and speak to the group and talk about his book, The Nats and the Grays, and it was very well received. And that era is of great interest to people that are Washington, D.C. baseball history attendees. They really enjoy hearing from authors. Hank Thomas, Walter Johnson's grandson, who's also been on the podcast with us, has been a speaker at one time. Gary Sarnoff, who wrote The Wrecking Crew of 33, was all about the 1933 Senators. Gary has been on with us too. Yeah, Gary's been with us. This year, Ed Johnson, just yesterday, had a nice presentation about Cecil Travis. Ed Johnson's been on with us. So, I'm happy the way it's turned out, and I'm glad to be a part of it. And they asked me to speak again this year, and I had about a half hour, I guess, and talked about Washington history and Griffith Stadium and the old Senators, the expansion Senators, and Ronnie and Chad. We even got into quite a bit of a discussion about the Minnesota Twins.
Great.
Whoa.
Great.
George, can you recreate that a little bit? Could you?
Well, what it is
I know
is
you're
that,
not going to do your whole speech.
Well, no. I mean, it's a lot of it is what we've really talked about. I mean, the fact is that Washington, when my dad played, Washington had been a small ball team. They had virtually no right-handed power because Griffith Stadium was so big, and the left field line at Griffith Stadium was 405 feet. So there weren't many people of any team other than when Mickey Mantle hit his shot that could reach that kind of distance. So Washington built their ball club over the years with great pitchers like Walter Johnson and great defense and speed. And the speed they had, of course, was my dad, but before that, they had Clyde Milan, they had Sam Rice, Hall of Famer. And, then they had quite a few line drive hitters, left-handed line drive hitters, because the right field wall at Griffith Stadium was 30 feet high, but it was reachable. But the line drive hitters would hit it off the wall, and yesterday, they started to kid me. They said, yeah, Mickey Vernon put a lot of dents in that right field wall. I said, yes, he certainly did, because he was a line drive hitter. Now, you had guys over the years like the great, Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig who hit more for distance, and they were able to clear that, so they hit a lot of home runs at Griffith Stadium. But basically, the Washington club was built on speed, defense, and they had very good left-handed hitters. But the right-handed hitters, like my dad had 21 career home runs. So, I mean, he was never a home run threat, but that was not his job. His job was a leadoff batter, and his job was to get on base, get in the scoring position, and score. So that was basically what my talk was in just a couple minutes to let you know what I was talking about yesterday.
That sounds a lot like what the Nationals are doing now, from what I've been reading. With Adam Eaton and Trey Turner in the 1-2 slots, the idea is get these guys on base and then let the big guys drive them in, which has always been one of the cardinal, plays of baseball. What you were talking about, George, is this reminiscent of the old style baseball. It wasn't to hit home runs; it was to get guys on base and drive them in.
Well, it is, David, absolutely correct, and that's what's called small ball. And the reason I say small ball because you're dependent upon your players to move your runners around to get in scoring position. And a perfect example of that, and I don't mean to dominate it with my dad's statistics, but in 1942, I believe it was, he led the American League in runs scored with 102. And he was a leadoff man with no power, but he was able to get on base and steal second or steal third, get in the scoring position, and then score. And that was his job, and it was very effective. Now, the reason we brought up the Minnesota Twins and Ronnie and Chad is because Washington went from small ball to long ball in the last couple of years because they moved the left field line in from 405 to 355. Roy Sievers developed, Jim Lemon developed, Harmon Killebrew developed, and Bob Allison developed. Well, then all of a sudden the club is moved to Minnesota, and so the Twins benefit by having tremendous home run hitters, power hitters, at the new ballpark in Minnesota. And, Washington is now left with an expansion team with virtually, again, no power, but the fans in Washington were happy to get baseball back, but 10 years later, they're devastated again because Bob Short, who took over the ownership of the club, he makes a deal with Texas, moves the team to Texas, and now Washington becoming the Texas Rangers, and now Washington is without baseball until the new Washington Nationals come in 2005.
How many years was that?
34 years.
34 years.
You mentioned that. That astounds me. That first of all, that the time has gone by so quickly.
Right.
But
yes.
And in all walks of life, we're waking up, and all of a sudden it's 2018. But that notwithstanding, it was given that they moved the first time to Minnesota, and they were given and Washington was given an expansion team just as those guys were developing, as you said, George.
Right.
And then the expansion team moves within how many years? I don't think it was
10 years. The team was born in 1961. The team left in 1971.
Right.
Wow.
I'll tell you
now that was
quick
an
story.
ownership. Oh, that was an owner going bankrupt. Short, am I correct?
Bob Short had made some kind of a deal. I don't know what the deal was, but I know it incensed so many people in Washington because Bob Short, whatever it was, I mean, he made money, lost money, who knows? But when he made the deal with Texas, now they're the Texas Rangers, and he made a fortune. And the fact is that, Ted Williams, to give you an example, Ted Williams was brought in by Bob Short in 1969 to manage the expansion Senators. Led the Senators to their first winning season in I don't know how many years, 1969. 1970 and 71, they started to falter again. 71, they leave. The last game, they rip up D.C. State, RFK Stadium. They put signs up. Short stinks. The Bob Short stinks. The forfeit was called. They couldn't even finish the game. So many people were so upset that this was going to be the last game in Washington. Ted Williams had signed a 5-year contract. He goes with Short to Texas for 1 year and says, "I've had enough." And he gets out of his 5th year of his contract. So, I mean, it was just a bad situation in Washington. And now, people are happy. They're so excited to get baseball back, even though, and David and I have talked about it, many people, the current Washington Nationals, wonderful team, but they're in the National League, and the history of baseball over the years was Washington was American League City. So it's a different team, a different franchise, a different league.
Mm-hmm. Well, it comes under the category of bastardizing our teams, all of them, but baseball in particular. You got Houston in the American League, and it just doesn't ring true to people. Right. You get up in the morning and you want to know what's happening, and you have to remind yourself that Houston is in the AL West. Well, I don't understand. Oh, I'm sorry, in the
AL East.
And
Houston.
No, in the AL West. Am I correct?
West. Yeah.
Well, whatever it is, Ralph, I can't even.
They had Atlanta in the NL West for a long time.
Yeah.
And I had a hard time with that one. I don't know what baseball does if they have people come in just deliberately to shuffle things up and mess our minds up.
Well, you know what? We've had those. We've had those discussions, and I know the other day, and Hal Bach, Hal and I and Ralph, we're going to be on, I guess, on Tuesday. But Hal had to laugh because he said, the World Series this year was 2 National League teams. Because you think about Houston, that's a National League team, and they're playing the Dodgers, obviously a National League team. But the fact is that Houston was now an American League team.
Yeah.
And they are tinkering with the game, and we've talked about this. I don't want to bring this up on this podcast, but they're changing some rules that to me are crazy. And I mean they eliminate the intentional walk. They do all this stuff now. They're experimenting with some kind of crazy rule where after 11th inning or something in a ball game, if they're tied, they'll put a runner on second base, and then if you get them in, the game's over. I mean, to me, that's just absolute nonsense.
That's terrible. That's terrible.
Yeah. Well, they're doing it with the minor leagues this year to see the effect, and I think that's a false experiment because what they do in the minor leagues has no bearing on what they do up in the major leagues in that sense. I mean, sure they could create all these scenarios in the minor leagues, but when you get to Major League Baseball, you don't want to see a runner put on second base, even if it's the 11th inning. And I tell you, I started to tell you the story about the iteration of the Washington Senators under Bob Short. I must have been at one of the last games they ever played I guess it was the 71 season. No, it was it would have been about 68 or 6. Anyway, it was the longest game played. A bunch of us from the office decided we'd go see a Washington game. So we got tickets and we all went out to RFK Stadium, and a couple of the people had never been to a baseball game before. So they weren't really particularly interested. They just, especially one woman came along and she didn't know anything about baseball. And as it got close to the ninth inning, she said, well, when do we go home? Because we had to work. We went into work about 6:30 in the morning. And it was a weekday night. And we said, well, you can't leave until it's over. Figure that, it'll be over by the ninth, maybe the 10th. Well, this game went on and on. It was like a W. Kinsella short story where the game never ended. We actually left about 1:30 in the morning, and they were still playing.
Right, right.
And we listened to the game on the radio as we went home.
Well, David, that's true, and that to me, I mean, that's an extreme when it happens, and there've been tremendously long games, but
oh sure,
but that is the attraction of the game because there is no clock, and Hal Bach has mentioned this many times. I mean, there's a clock in football, there's a clock in basketball, there's a clock in hockey. Right. But there's no clock in baseball. I mean, the game is over. The game is over when the game is over.
Yeah, that's all Yogi's saying, and it's so true.
Ain't over till it's over, right?
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's why fans will sit there.
For me, it is so much the record book. And if you put a rule in there that says a runner starts out on second, and then he scores, and they put that run in the record book, and that runner gets credited for a run scored when he starts out on second.
And the batter gets credit for a run, an RBI.
That totally screws the RBI up.
Sure.
The RBI deserved. Should it be half an RBI because he drove him in from second, and he would have come up without anybody on? And does the run count? You mentioned your dad had 102 runs scored.
Right.
Well, whatever player scored on that, it's fictitious now. It's because it hasn't gone into effect. But if that happens, they put that in. That really screws up the all-time run scoring record. How many runs were scored all time in baseball? How come that only counts as a half a run?
Yeah, well, you know what, Ralph, you bring up something. I have no idea how they're going to resolve it or if it will need to be resolved. Maybe they're just a trial balloon and they're going to, let it deflate and forget about it. But, the thing is, in what the heck was it, in 61, when Maris hit 61 home runs, they come up with their infinite wisdom of putting an asterisk. Well, I mean, why do you do that? I mean, it wasn't his fault that the schedule went from 154 games to 162 games.
No.
He hit 61 home runs. That was, he hit the record.
Ford Frick was so Babe Ruth slanted. He was a ghostwriter for Babe Ruth earlier in his life. And that record, that asterisk never got into the record books.
No. Listen, here's a scenario for the managers dealing with this runner on second base. Suppose it's a 12th inning and they put the runner on second base as required, okay? And there's maybe one out, let's say. So the defending team intentionally walks the next batter to set up a force at any base. And you've got a play there that didn't happen on the field. It happened, so you walk the guy on first and you get a ground ball to short, let's say, and you get a double play and you start the next inning. What does that count? How does that count?
Right. And
I think it's terrible.
That's a very good.
No, it is a very good point. I agree, David.
And what if the runner gets picked off second?
Well,
the runner on?
Sure, I mean that happens. Guys get picked off.
They're going to put another runner on second after that.
Right. That's a play. I mean, that's a defensive play, and guys do get picked off. And
sure.
I agree. I mean, I mean, I was told this a couple of weeks ago, and it just started to bother me because when you're talking about the integrity of the game, and there's a lot of guys that are tinkering with it now. I guess they're MBAs or front office guys, and maybe they had never played the game. But it looks good to them on paper to make all these crazy changes, just like, the intentional walk. To me, the intentional walk was part of baseball. That's what you did.
Right.
If you wanted to have the catcher hold his arm out, and then all of a sudden, you're signaling, hey, look, you know what? This batter thinks he's going to walk. So all of a sudden they come in. I've seen it. And they come in with a third strike, and the guy's looking at the pitch, and he's out, period. There's no intentional walk. That's a defensive strategy. That's a move that a manager makes, or a pitcher and catcher, or whatever it is. It doesn't affect the integrity of the game. But if you all of a sudden, now your intentional walk, you're changing it, and you're putting a runner on second base, and you're doing all this kind of nonsense, to me is crazy.
They don't even have
Leave
to
the game alone.
Walk them. They just wave them over to first base.
Yeah, I mean, they
with
do.
With a runner on second, that really screws up the strategy.
Sure.
Because
right.
the fun of an intentional walk is that leader leading off second base, who may be going to third base if the throw goes awry. And, I mean, it's just, why mess with it?
There have been, and Ralph, you're bringing up another point, there have been intentional walks where, the pitcher has really thrown a bad pitch, and it gets by the catcher. And
exactly.
I mean, that happens because
All
baseball players
are
human beings. They make mistakes just like umpires makes mistakes, and that's part of the game.
Where they're giving intentional walk, and the pitcher throws one a little close to the plate, and the batter can hit it.
Oh, sure, they can. Absolutely.
Sure. That's happened too.
Yep, it has been, Ronnie. Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of things that could happen. And baseball is a game of strategy. And a lot of people, they don't understand the game if they haven't played the game. But baseball is a very cerebral game. There's a move, there's a counter move for everything. And it's not, when you're looking at a ball game, I mean, I know because I played and my dad played and he talked to me and he showed me things. I mean, you watch, a batter is getting the signal from the third base coach. Well, that signal, that might be a whole bunch of signals or might be no signal at all because maybe he's getting the signal from the manager in the dugout or maybe he's getting a signal from the first base coach. You don't know what they put in their strategy book. But on the other hand, the other team is trying to steal the signs. So, every move has a counter move. That's the way baseball has been played for years and years and years.
Well,
I would just leave it alone.
There's an interesting statistic today talking about pitching.
Well said, Ronnie Rabinovich.
Yeah, trying to speed up the game between pitches. Last year they determined that the fastest average for delivering a pitch was 20.6 seconds. And the slowest was Masahiro Tanaka, who delivered a pitch every, 28 seconds. So, I mean, it's not 20 seconds is a reasonable amount of time. So all this tinkering is, as George says, is really messing up the game. Yeah.
Well, what do you guys account for when George's dad played? Games were played in sometimes less than 2 hours.
Right, they were.
Sure they were. Yeah.
So there is, we're talking now 3.5 hours.
Sometimes 4 hours.
Yeah.
Or four.
Well, there's a lot of it. There's a lot of it. First of all, if there's television involved, you got all kinds of commercial breaks, and the guys are standing around. Then you got you got pitch counts, so they're removing pitchers. Pitchers are coming in. They're taking their warm ups, doing all that kind of stuff. Batters are standing up there adjusting their hand. I don't know how many times I've seen batters adjusting their gloves. They step out of the box, they're adjusting their batting gloves, step back in the box. I mean, that's all time involved. Now,
right.
I can tell you for a fact when my dad played and when they played the game back in the 20s with Walter Johnson and before that, the game was 9 innings long. Sometimes the game would be played in well under 2 hours because the pitchers got up there, they pitched. nobody was posturing for TV. I mean, there wasn't any TV. They were doing some radio, but that was basically it. There were no commercial breaks. And so guys are playing a game. They used to play doubleheaders in 4 hours, doubleheaders, and now you really don't even see a doubleheader. And if you do, because it's a rain out or it's a makeup game, it could be 5 hours long.
Yeah, and there were no padded gloves either to fool around with. The guys came up barehanded.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's true. And they threw their glove on the field.
Yes.
Well, they did that. The infielders did that. Yes, they did.
Right. Yeah. No, I think the outfielders did too.
Just like they had the photographers on the field. Can you imagine today if you had photographers on the field? You know, back when you know, a lot of the action shots you see in the old days, those shots were taken because the photographers were on the field. They didn't have zoom lenses and all the technology that they have today. So if you see a photograph of games played in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever, you're going to see photographers on the field.
And with big clunky cameras too.
Absolutely.
Not like they had iPhones.
Yep. And they used to be positioned. So say you had a left-handed hitter, the photographers are on the right-hand side looking into the batter. If you have a right-handed hitter, the photographers are on the left side looking into the batter. So that's what they did. And then
chance of getting creamed too with the foul.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I haven't documented. I haven't studied it, so I don't know. But I'm sure that at some time it might have happened. But I do know that that the photograph that we use on our Timeless Baseball website, my dad stealing third base against Cleveland in 1938. It's a wonderful shot. It was my dad's favorite shot. Was shot by an on-the-field photographer standing right behind the third base coach at Griffith Stadium.
Whoa. I remember DiMaggio's streak, and they had photographers on the field a lot then when that was
they sure did. Yep.
Yeah.
Speaking of that streak, do you think it'll ever be broken?
You know what? I mean, that's an amazing, you know what's amazing there, Ronnie? I mean, you know, who knows? But, I mean, guys have come close. I guess guys that get in the 40s or something like that. I think it's maybe all records are going to be broken eventually. But to do that at the major league level, I mean, is just, it's unheard of. And in that year, you know, you got DiMaggio hitting 56 straight and Ted Williams batting 406. Same year. You know.
And then DiMaggio hit another 15, 16 games in a row after that break.
Yeah, Kenny Keltner of the Indians stopped his streak.
And he had a tremendous streak when he was playing in San Francisco for the Steelers, which was even longer than the 56.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah. But those streaks, I mean, you know, it used to be talked about. Well, Lou Gehrig's streak is, you know, unreachable, but you know, Ripken broke it, and I mean, and Babe Ruth's, you know, that streak, I mean, that home run record and all that kind of stuff. But those things happen. But whether or not, you know, DiMaggio's streak, I mean, you know, I played baseball, David. I mean, all you guys have played. I mean, to get up. I used to be excited to get a hit in one game, you know, let alone 56 games in a row.
And that wasn't the majors.
Absolutely, it wasn't the majors.
So, tell me, you've seen a ton of baseball games at the pro level, and you played at the college level.
Right.
How big a differential is there for, I mean, I pretty much know because I've been around minor league baseball, and most players when they come into baseball out of college have some developing to do in the minors before they reach the majors. But is it that far away being a top-notch college baseball player? Is it that far away from being a top-notch Major League Baseball?
Well, let me answer it this way, Ralph. When back many years ago, college baseball, you know, it was not the same as it is today. They really didn't. They had part-time coaches and that kind of thing. There were very few really good college baseball coaches, and most young guys, if they were a good player, they weren't even going to consider going to college. They were going to play in the minors. So they would start at, say, Class D, which today is short season A, and they would work their way up the organizational ladder. Well, now you've got a lot of professional ex-players, a lot of, tremendous coaching, and you get a lot of kids coming out of college, and they're tremendous ball players. They might be playing in short season A. My dad coached and managed an Oneonta for 4 years. He loved coaching these college kids coming out because he was teaching them not so much how to play the game, but how to become a professional, how to handle yourself, how to eat properly, how to do the kind of things that you needed to do, and you were going to make the major leagues. Some of these kids were great players, but they weren't able to handle the pressure of playing, and so they weren't able to fulfill their career. But other kids, they worked their way up, and you see a lot of kids today, they're coming into the major leagues after only a year or two in college. They're accomplished ball players. They're very good. And that level is say a double A, triple A, that kind of thing. That's about where in my opinion, the major colleges, that's about the kind of players that they're bringing out. Now, if you're playing at a small school in the Northeast and you're only playing 20 games a season because the weather is horrible, that's a different situation. But a lot of these kids that are really good, they're playing at southern schools, Miami, Texas, UCLA, USC, whatever it is, and they're playing 50, 60 game schedules, and they're coming out and playing in the minor leagues with a lot of skill. And
they're playing good competition too.
Right. After a year or two, you're going to see them, and you look at the rosters today, and they're going to say, this guy is a graduate of Miami or is a graduate of USC or Texas or whatever it is, and a year or two later, he's playing in the major leagues and doing very well.
Okay, George, your teammate, if I remember correctly, at Rutgers was future Major League catcher Jeff Torborg.
Yes, right.
Correct? Now, when you played with him, he was at a certain skill level at Rutgers.
Right.
When you watched him play in the majors, did you see a noticeable increase in his talent or in his development? Or was he as good basically as a catcher, maybe not as a hitter, when he played at Rutgers as he was later on?
Yeah, Jeff was a tremendous defensive catcher at Rutgers, but he was a tremendous offensive catcher too, because Jeff's senior year, I think he hit like 550.
Wow.
He got into the majors, and he was playing behind Johnny Roseboro. Roseboro was a left-handed hitter, and Jeff being a right-handed hitter, Jeff was only playing against left-handed pitching, and he'd only play, maybe one every 6 games or whatever it is. So Jeff could never hit in the major leagues, and that was really, where in college he'd be a great hitter, but defensively and knowledge of the game, Jeff had it. From the first time I met him and we started talking baseball, I knew that this guy really knew what he was talking about because he was very good. And then, Jeff has a wonderful career in the major leagues as a defensive catcher. He's a catcher.
And as a manager, too. He must
be. Right. He catches 3 no-hitters, including Koufax's perfect game. He manages 5 different major league teams. So, Jeff had a tremendous background in baseball, and I have to think, he played 1 year in the minors. He was a bonus baby. He signed with the Dodgers in '63. I think he played in Albuquerque in '64. Part of the season with the Dodgers, and then in '65 he's up there as their catcher and catches Koufax's perfect game. So defensively, Jeff had all the skills, and I'm sure that if he had played regularly in the major leagues, he'd have been able to hit. But in college, he was a tremendous hitter as well.
Yeah, platoon baseball really curtails a lot of guys' career. They assume because you're a lefty that you can't hit lefties.
Right.
Assume because you're a righty you can't hit righties.
Right.
And a player doesn't get that shot sometimes, and his career, he becomes a part-time player, and that's how it was with Torborg.
Well, and Jeff and I had talked about that many times. He said to me, he said, George, I think I could have hit. But he said, when you're only seeing, a major league pitcher, you're only seeing that guy throwing at you, every 5 or 6 days, you're sitting there on the bench. You're not playing. And that affects your skills. And he just happened to be, Well, he was in a situation that I mean, here he is. He's playing behind Roseboro, and Roseboro is an established catcher, but Roseboro is left-handed, and the majority of pitchers, are right-handed. So as Ralph is talking about, the theory is, you have a right-handed pitcher, you try to load your lineup with lefties. So when you're facing more right-handers, if you're a right-handed batter, you're only going to maybe face the left-handed pitcher back then, a little bit different today, but back then maybe every 5 or 6 games.
Right. That whole thing could be very overrated in terms of Casey Stengel brought it on with the platooning and what have you.
Right.
But it depends on if your player can come off the bench in the 6 games that he's not starting.
Right.
Some guys are naturally good pinch hitters, some aren't. Some enjoy the role, enjoy the pressure, and some, their mind wanders during the game. They don't stay in it. By the time they come up, they're not ready for it, and
right.
That's a skill in itself. Can you be a utility player? Can you be a pinch hitter? We should honor those guys, the Smokey Burgesses and the Bob Skinners and those guys, by doing a show sometime.
Well, that would be interesting because you're bringing up a very good point, Ralph. I mean, there is a certain skill level, and and some guys. I mean, if you're, I loved, and I was a right-handed hitter. I loved hitting against left-handers. Now, I'd be batting against a righty, and if the guy's throwing me fastballs, I said, hey, this is good. But if he starts throwing me curveballs, I'm bailing out, and and that's what sometimes you get that. A lot of times a left-handed pitcher will, he'll be throwing a curve or slider or whatever it is, and a right-handed hitter, he's got the advantage because he can see it better. So, I mean, that's part of it.
Right.
But if you've got guys that are like we're talking about with Jeff or anybody or Smokey Burgess or Skinner, those guys coming off the bench and able to hit, I mean, that's a gift and certainly a show. If you were able to get any of those guys, I don't know, it would be interesting to hear what they had to say.
Absolutely. Well, I enjoy not just listening to the people who played the game and hear what they had to say. Off time, the writers and the authors like yourselves who observe the game can give a much better interview than the players, it's been my experience, that actually play the game. A lot of times they just go up there. They don't know, and then they come on a show like this, and they really don't have anything to say to break it down. Just what you're doing, George, just telling us what it's like to stand in against a right-handed hitter. Did your dad bat left?
No, he was right-handed, but my dad was a very, very good bunter. So I mean, if a right-handed pitcher, if my dad was facing him, and he had an opportunity, and then again looking at either a situation, maybe the third baseman is playing deep, or maybe the first baseman, or they're not good, or the pitcher's not good coming off the mound. My dad was a very good bunter, so a lot of his major league hits were actually bunts because he was very accomplished at bunting, and that was part of his offensive capability.
Did he tinker with you as a kid and maybe make you a lefty at one time or another?
No.
Left-handed batter?
No, that didn't happen, Ralph. And my dad used to talk to me and said, look, if you never picked up a baseball, I still love you. You're my son. I just happened to love the game, and I was able to play, and I might have been able to make a career out of it. I don't know. But the fact is that I knew the game, but my dad would say to me all the time, he said, look, if you wanted me to help you with something, let me know. And we'd go out in our backyard and have a catch and that kind of thing. But he never was demanding. I mean, I would come to him sometimes and say, Dad, I'm having trouble with this or I'm having trouble with that. And he would talk to me about it. But on the other hand, he was not the kind of parent who would say, you got to get out there and, hit 1,000 balls or whatever. I mean, we would never do that. I just happened to pick up the game, I think, naturally because of him. But just being around
you drove
and learning.
yourself to it more than he drove you to it.
Yeah, well, I did, and the fact is that my dad was, very accomplished, but he was very quiet, and I learned as much about the game just sitting with him talking about life and just learning. And he'd bring up some baseball stories. And I was fortunate because a lot of those players that you read about, that David writes about, that Ronnie and Chet, I mean, I've said this before. I mean, Mickey Vernon, personal friend. Dutch Leonard, personal friend. Cecil Travis, personal friend. Ted Williams. I think I mentioned this. I ran into Ted Williams one time at a sporting goods show in Chicago. I hadn't seen him in years and years and years, and I just happened to, he walked by our booth. I stepped out, shook his hand, said, "Ted, I'm George Case's son." He said, "Well, goddamn," he said, "I haven't seen you since you were a little kid." So, I mean, that to me, you know, is the kind of life that I was brought up in, and I was very fortunate because I saw a little bit of the game from the inside, being a part of a baseball family.
You sounded just like him then, too, I must say. Really
yeah.
did.
Well, you know what? I tried to clean it up a little bit.
Wow.
You know what I find interesting? Look, because we've been talking about the father-son relationship here. One of the things I've noticed that we didn't see as much of in the past is sons following their fathers into the major leagues. It's almost now we've got the two Harper brothers coming up. Well, perhaps, but there are so many major league ball players today who are the sons of former major league ball players.
Right.
Dodgers seem to have.
Griffey is a good example.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there are, David, and you bring that up, and there's some that are very good. There's some that struggle with it. Now, you know, Yogi Berra's sons, they were both ball players, but they didn't have nearly the skill and the ability that Yogi had. I also mentioned, you know, Joe DiMaggio's son. Joe DiMaggio's son went to prep school not probably 20 minutes from where we are in Pennsylvania. He went to Lawrenceville Prep, and he actually played football because he said, you know, I don't want to have everybody talking about me as Joe DiMaggio Jr. You know, I want to do something else in a different sport. And that's part of it, too, where you have some players, you know, their offspring, if they have the same name, it's a little bit difficult. Now, if they have a different name, you know, it's a little bit easier because people aren't comparing. But the thing is that major league players often have sons that follow them, but they don't have the same level. A perfect example of that is George Sisler. George Sisler, Hall of Famer, played, you know, in the major leagues in the 20s. His two sons, Dave Sisler, pitched for the expansion Senators, who I knew Dave. Dave went to Princeton. And Dick Sisler, who probably achieved the greatest amount of fame, didn't compare with George, but he was the guy who hit the winning home run to give the Phillies the pennant in 1950 over the Dodgers.
Yes, the Whiz Kids.
Right.
The Mantle Boys didn't do very well.
No, they didn't do much. Right.
Not even just baseball. I mean, just in life.
Yeah. Right.
Oh, DiMaggio Jr. did very poorly in life.
Yes,
he did.
Yes.
He did. I didn't want to bring that up, but it did. It was a very sad story about him, and he passed away. And you know,
what happened to him?
Well, he was really, you know, I guess Joe almost disowned him, and he became, you know, a street person. And it was just a very, very terrible story. And it was Joe DiMaggio Jr. That was who it was, and
right.
It was very difficult.
There was this beautiful picture of Joe and his son in a Sports Illustrated, on the cover of Sports Illustrated back in the day. It was touching. The kid had a little uniform on, and and to see it go from that to what it evolved to is
No, Ralph, I've seen that picture. It was a very nice picture, and you know, from what I understand, you know, Joe was not that much of an involved father, so who knows? Maybe that's where it came from. But that's the way it started. It looked very promising, but it certainly didn't end up that way.
Yeah. And it, you know, with DiMaggio, there was another brother besides Dom, Vince, who made the major leagues.
Yeah, Vince.
And he struggled later in life as well. So
well, it could be. Ralph, I don't know. I don't know the whole story about the DiMaggios. I mean, Joe and Dom, my dad played against both of them, knew both of them very well. But Vince DiMaggio was like the third brother, played Major League, very accomplished. Matter of fact, in the 1943 All-Star game, he was 3 for 3, almost hit for the cycle. He hit I think a single, triple, and a home run. That was probably his greatest Major League game. But Vince always played in the shadow of Joe and Dom, so it had to be hard on him. Where after their Major League careers, Joe made a lot of money, Dominic made a lot of money. They used to call him the little professor. He's very cerebral. Vince was sort of like the forgotten one, so it could very well be. And I'd be honest with you, Ralph, I don't know what really happened to him after his Major League career.
He was sort of like Zeppo Marx.
Right.
Right.
That's a very good way of
saying it.
That's right.
But Dom DiMaggio wore glasses, so that was part of the.
Yeah, he did, and he was very slight. Joe was a pretty big guy, but Dom was on the small side. But Dom had great skill, and it just so happened that he was overshadowed by Joe because they were both playing the same position in the major leagues.
Right.
And Joe's with the Yankees and Dom's with the Red Sox. So all the publicity that was going in that rivalry, but it really centered upon Joe being the premier center fielder in baseball, and here's his younger brother Dominic playing the same position for the arch rival.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Cal Ripken's son is I saw him yesterday in the spring training game, one of the highlights. So it'll be interesting to see if he makes it into the majors.
Right, it would be. What position does he play?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Who's that?
I just saw him that he was hitting.
Yeah, is his name Cal Jr. or is it some other? I mean,
I think it is.
Okay, because there was another brother was Billy Ripken.
Yeah,
and Billy was a very good player, and their father was a longtime coach with Baltimore. But at least Billy had the advantage of here he is. His name is Billy Ripken. It's not Cal.
I just read this on the internet. Do you know what Cal Ripken's kid's name is?
What's that?
George Case the Fourth.
Oh, that's very nice, Ralph. Thank you. I'm in exalted company, and I'll tell my son that he's an exalted company.
Okay. Well, we're an exalted company, George, let me tell you.
Yes, we are.
Let me ask you guys a little bit, because a fellow that, and I haven't even thanked you yet, you brought Phil Skiminoli to the zone through Ian Kahanowitz interviewed him about Roy Sievers. And
by the way, Ralph, I met him yesterday, and because he was there and talking about his book and talking about Roy Sievers, and after the presentation, he came up to me. He said, "George," said, "Ian wants me to say hello to you, and I want you to come to one of our book signings or talk about baseball or whatever." And so I had to laugh, Ralph, when you just mentioned it, because I just met him first time was yesterday.
Wow. Well, you introduced him for one reason or another to the network, so I want to credit with you for that. Ian gave a terrific interview, or he gave Ian a terrific interview. And the one thing I wanted to mention is that Casey Stengel said that Sievers had the sweetest swing in baseball in his time. Yeah. Now, right-handed swing, but that's a high compliment. Sievers is very underrated in history for one reason or another. Can you enlighten us on that?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, I remember him when he played, and I think he was very underrated. And I do know that when Calvin Griffith brought the left field line in at Griffith Stadium, all of a sudden, it was able to reach Roy. Yeah, Roy was there with his power and was able to reach it, and they used to call it Sieversville. And then it was the beer garden was created because there was a gap between the fences and that kind of thing. And Roy, I think maybe part of the problem, I don't know this, but Roy played most of his career in Washington, and then he played in St. Louis. So, you don't have the same amount of exposure playing in cities like that as you do, playing in the New York area. And that's always.
I hate to correct you. I think he played in Philadelphia, not St. Louis.
Well, no, he played the St. Louis Browns. Roy Cedars played for the St. Louis Browns.
Yes.
Now Roy might have played a couple other teams, but his major league career was really based upon his years in Washington and St. Louis.
Right. That later on he did play with the Phillies, but towards the end of his career.
Right.
Absolutely. Ronnie, anything you want to add?
Oh, this is so interesting. I'm fascinated by George's report about yesterday, and it's always fun to be on the show with you guys. And I think the Twins are going to do well. I think they're still looking for another starting pitcher, but I think they're going to do okay.
Okay.
I heard an interesting comment yesterday, Ronnie. I was watching the first spring training game featuring the Red Sox, and the announcers were talking about the Twins being a much improved team this year, and they pointed out that all those Red Sox Twins games, they all ran long. So
right. That's right.
Well, Ronnie and Chad, you two guys should be looking forward to it, because I really think the Twins, could have a very good season. I mean, I think they surprised everybody last year. Now we'll see if they repeat it, but I think they're going to do well. So you two guys should be very excited about the prospects of Minnesota.
Yeah, I think it's going to be good. I like that the two new guys they brought in, that that general manager and his partner. The one guy from Texas and the other guy was from Cleveland. And they're sharp young guys, and I think they've done well. I'm glad they kept Molitor as a manager. I think that's a great idea. And we'll see.
Well, I think they think they're going to do well because they kept Dozier. And,
right.
Right. He's high priced, and if they didn't think they'd get bang for the buck, they trade him off. If they didn't think they were somewhat ready, they can surprise. That would be nice. Chad, what are your thoughts?
Is he there? I don't know if he's here. Chad, are you there? I don't think so.
All right. Well, we lost Chad.
Okay.
Okay.
But, we'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens.
One more starting pitcher, I think they'll be in pretty good shape.
All right. Anything that's on your mind? It doesn't have to be any of you guys. Doesn't have to be about Washington. Anything about baseball, early spring training that stands out. How about you, David?
Well, just being able to see, the Red Sox are not my favorite team, but just the fact that there was a spring training game on TV, I made sure to catch a good few innings of it, because then we're really into it now. That means no more winter football nonsense and all this stuff.
Baseball is back.
It is.
They're starting to play the real sport again, right, David?
Exactly.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Spring
training to me reminds me when I grew up in New York, and February, early March could be incredibly bitter cold. And they'd have a spring training game on, Mel Allen would come on, and it would be in Fort Lauderdale, and you'd see the boats. Background, the sun is shining, and I'm in New York.
You're saying, what the hell am I doing up in the north?
Right, and these guys, the fans walking around in shorts, and T-shirts.
Move out even faster. But spring is wonderful for baseball. It gives us all, whatever team we're rooting for, gives us all a chance to hope and hope for the best.
Well, that's the thing about the difference.
You're still a Yankee fan, and your Yankees are stacked.
Yeah, we could use another starting pitcher too. We'll see what happens.
Probably use an infielder maybe to go.
Well, they've got
two rookies.
Yeah, they've got a couple of journeyman infielders that have had a good bit of major league experience. So we'll see what like Danny Espinosa's there now, and we'll see what happens. I don't think they're too worried about that. The infielders. I think despite what Cashman says, I still think they could use another frontline starting pitcher.
Well,
but we shall see.
All right. Let's see. George, anything you want to close with?
No, I just really enjoy this. This is fun for me to talk about baseball and, to be on with you guys. And, for me, just remember, I can't keep up with all the stuff that goes on today. So, David, when you've seen the spring training game, that's wonderful. I think it's great. And I'm looking out now in my front window, and I'm looking at a swamp. And, there's so much water. There's been so much rain and cold.
Yeah.
So to look at a game from Florida in the sunshine, that's wonderful. Spring is here, and baseball will be here soon, and let's go and have a good time. So,
and I still say opening day should be a national holiday.
Yeah,
it should be.
I'm with you.
You're right.
I'm with you.
David, I agree with you.
Yeah, okay, good. That's 2 votes.
I see so much snow, I can't believe it.
Oh yeah, we just had a lot of fog.
Yeah. We got
all right, guys. Terrific show.
Okay.
Happy to do this every Sunday. This is incredibly fun.
It was great. Yeah.
Love to look back in our memory banks. Thank God we can remember.
Yes,
that's for sure. That's a lot better than the alternative, Ralph.
Right, exactly.
If we're just sitting here being old, that wouldn't be good. But the advantages of being old is that we have those memories.
Right.
So let's keep that graph from crossing. How about that? As we get older.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Really
David, an hour and we're going to see David at the bottom of the hour for another show, Bronx Roots. And thank you, guys. We'll be back next week. And,
okay.
If you're listening out there and enjoy us for any reason, would you be kind enough to box up some lightly used children's books and take them to the Head Start program wherever you live? Kids need to read. They need to develop a passion. They need to get their noses out of the computers and the games, the devices, and they need to become school ready. They are our future because our present is not all the way we'd like it to be. We got to start making this world a better place, and got to do it through the kids. So if you do that, I'd appreciate it. We'll be back next week. Thank you, gentlemen. I'm grateful for your company.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody.
George Case, the man. Adios, everybody.